I think Pam Bondi got in over her skis, is that she wanted to tell people, we're going to do this, we're going to release it. Then they realized that there's not a lot of there to release that will be of interest, right? Like the legal wonks are really interested in things like, well, I want to know more about why they didn't prosecute Jeffrey Epstein back in the day. Okay, that's not what the MAGA folks are interested in. They want names. They want lists. They want flight logs. And the problem is that Donald Trump is on the flight logs.
Tucker Carlson says it threatens to blow up the whole MAGA thing. Nick Fuentes says MAGA is dead. And Steve Bannon says the Epstein files could cost Trump 40 seats at the midterms. Welcome to the Sanity Podcast. I'm Dave Briggs here with Allison Camerata. Please subscribe to the channel and like this very video. I have seen MAGA Nation lined up and furious about this, Allison. They all want Pam Bondi out, and they all want Trump to come clean. I don't think they'll get any of that, and I'll tell you why I think this story's over by the end of the week.
Ooh, that's juicy, Dave. I think that it's fascinating. I mean, these are all people who are known for hyperbole and for conspiracy theories, that whole litany of people that you just mentioned. And yet somehow this has captured their attention in a way that nothing else has, as though they really believe there's a client list. I mean, I'm going to explain to you why I do not think that. We'll see what our guest thinks, because we have the perfect guest for this. It's Dan Abrams. He's, of course, a journalist. He's a media mogul. He's the founder of Mediaite, and he's a lawyer. And he's done a very deep dive on the Ghislaine Maxwell first trial and what came out during that. So it'll be very interesting to get from him where he thinks the truth lies here.
Dan Abrams, it is unfortunate, perhaps, that How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days is one of my favorite movies of all time. But when it comes to the MAGA media, I'm calling okay, I'm calling that on MAGA media, that this will destroy MAGA and that they're going to hold Donald Trump account. Are you buying that this could end the whole thing, according to Tucker Carlson and everyone else in the MAGAverse?
No, I mean, I don't believe that this is going to be some, hugely seminal moment that's going to destroy MAGA. But I do think this is a political vulnerability for Donald Trump with his base, because this is the first time we've seen some amount of distance between Donald Trump and the MAGA base since he's been president on something that they care about, right? That's the key, right? Is that, you can argue there have been a lot of controversial things that have come out of this administration, but the MAGA verse doesn't care about it and supported Trump in all of those endeavors. This is the first time we're seeing them saying, we want something, and Trump and his attorney general saying, you're not going to get it.
That's very interesting to me, Dan. And here's what I want your take on this. These are not people, the Pam Bondis, the Kash Patel, the Dan Bonginos, who are known for their allegiance to facts. Why don't they just make something up? I mean, I don't want to suggest something to them that they haven't thought of, but why not just come up with a binder and make something up? Like, they're above that? I mean, why?
Well, come on. You want them to hand in like a fake binder of like stuff with like phony names and stuff?
I don't want them to, but I'm saying, why wouldn't they? These are people who want to keep the MAGA red meat going. I can't believe that in this case they're acting lawfully.
Come on, you're going to get caught. You're going to get caught if you do that, because remember that a lot of other people in a previous administration have seen what's in the files. They've seen the documents. They know what the case is about. The idea that somehow they're going to produce like a phony dossier of stuff, to me, is kind of ridiculous. But
okay, I'm glad there's still some reality-based something somewhere. That comforts me.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I think that a lot of what you're seeing, and look, I am critical of Bondi, and certainly I was very critical of Kash Patel and Bongino. at times. But, there's with a lot of this stuff, there tends to be a kernel of truth that gets amplified in certain cases unfairly, unnecessarily, without evidence, right? But it's not like literally making stuff up out of whole cloth. Now, some of the folks on the conspiracy side are now just making stuff up. And the problem for them is Dan Bongino and Patel are saying, sorry, guys, it's not there. We can't deliver what you're looking for. And that's frustrating them.
But Dan, the one thing I can't speak MAGA, and I can't quite figure out why the president enriching himself to the tune of $500 million on a crypto scheme that sells direct access to him, the fact that he denied a free and fair election, encouraged storming the Capitol, and then pardoned the very people that beat police officers. He is cheered for that at Turning Point, Charlie Kirk's weekend event. Yet and it was almost unanimous, all of them cared about this issue. Why?
Because they believe that it's going to expose liberal leaders involved in some level of wrongdoing. Because they believe that there's been a cover-up by the Biden administration to hide wrongdoing primarily by people on the left. And, if you do, look, in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, and remember, she was also sued, so there was also civil lawsuits. We got a lot of information, and a lot of the people that were on Jeffrey Epstein's plane, a lot of the flight logs came out. I mean, people say, what about the flight log? Like, a lot of the flight logs are out there. Donald Trump rode on the plane 7 times. And he said, I never rode on that stupid plane. We learned in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, he rode on the plane 7 times. But Bill Clinton rode on the plane dozens of times, right? So, this isn't a Trump issue. Bill Gates had numerous meetings with Epstein. So it does tend to be kind of bipartisan, but that doesn't fit with what they're looking for. And I think here's an interesting question to ask. If you were to ask the hardest core MAGA person, and if you say to them, look, here's the issue. We can release this stuff, and it'll be pretty embarrassing for Bill Clinton, be embarrassing for a lot of, some celebrities and this. It's also going to be a little embarrassing for Donald Trump. Is it worth it? Should we do it? I don't know the answer to the question, right? Because they're not talking about this as if the reason it's not coming out is because of Donald Trump. And again, that doesn't mean Donald Trump engaged in any wrongdoing. It just means that what they want is all the underlying information. Because the black book everyone talks about is a book of the victims. It's not a book. We know his black book. His black book had the names of all of the girls and the women. That's the black book.
Right.
Other stuff because we hung out with.
But doesn't that just tell you, Dan, there is no client list? That means there is no. If there was something that embarrassed Clinton, if there was a Clinton name on some client list, we would have seen that.
That's the thing.
There is no client list.
Look, I had a guy call into my radio show today and say, Dan, how can you believe with thousands of victims that there wasn't a broader ring? And the answer to that is, I don't know that there were thousands of victims, right? If you actually look at the numbers from, the settlements and you look at some of the legal documents, it would look like there were like 150 to maybe 200. I don't know where Pam Bondi gets the number of 1,000 plus. I don't know where anyone else gets the numbers of thousands of victims. My guess is there were a couple of hundred victims. And when Pam Bondi initially said in March, well, there are FBI agents working 24/7 to redact information to protect the victims, that stuff was already done in connection with the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. So that the minute she said that, I was thinking, that's kind of weird that she's claiming that like the reason this is taking so long is because they're redacting names. And then you say, well, but they redacted almost all these names in connection with Ghislaine Maxwell. So look, I think here's the reality. I think Pam Bondi got in over her skis, is that she wanted to tell people, we're going to do this, we're going to release it. Then they realized that there's not a lot of there to release that will be of interest, right? Like the legal wonks are really interested in things like, well, I want to know more about why they didn't prosecute Jeffrey Epstein back in the day. Okay, that's not what the MAGA folks are interested in. They want names. They want lists. They want flight logs. And the problem is that Donald Trump is on the flight logs. So, and there is no client list. There's no evidence of Jeffrey Epstein selling, having like a ring here, apart from some allegations from a handful of victims talking about a couple of other people who were involved.
All right, let's get through the next consequences of it. And ultimately, I think this is mutually assured destruction. I think both Republicans, Democrats are on that list, and that's why no one's ever released it. My question is...
Hold on, Dave. Let me just, so you think there is a list? You think, like Dan and I agree, there's no list. You think there is a list?
Throughout the documents, but I want to move past that to the point of, right now it appears someone has to go. The Attorney General Pam Bondi or Dan Bongino. Dan, I say no one goes because Donald Trump doesn't fire people for incompetence. He fires them for disloyalty. And all of these people have been Roy Cohn. Do you think anyone goes?
I think Bongino might quit. Remember, I think he's not the head of the FBI. He's not the Attorney General. He's the deputy, right? And he could make a lot of money back in MAGA world, sort of going out with a bang here, right? And saying, I just couldn't do it. I can't do it anymore. And look, by the way, he's got a point as to the rollout, right? I mean, the one thing that they release, the one thing is this video that supposedly shows that Epstein killed himself, right? And even that has a minute missing, right? Which is like the ultimate in conspiracy theories. You offer up the supposed transparency of the actual videos and you have a minute missing. It's like,
metadata says it was altered.
Yeah, sorry?
The metadata suggests that it was
altered. Well, it was edited, but look, but they, Pam Bondi's position, and this is probably true, is that the raw data, the way that it sort of counts and is distributed, is there's a new clock that starts at midnight and it ends at 11:59. But they say they're going to release the final minute. I'm not worried about that. I'm convinced Epstein did kill himself. Right? All right. Look, and the challenge in believing that Epstein was killed is it would have gotten out by now. There would have been something and someone who would have said, here's why it doesn't, here's where there's no way. Now, Michael Baden came out a while ago and said from a medical examiner perspective, he doesn't think that he could have died by suicide. But look, I think that they will release that final thing. They'll show the continuity of the video, but it won't end. Look, I could tell you that I could explain to you for a lot of reasons why Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. And yet, I say that, and I am like,
But Dan, at what point do the right-wing media talkers, influencers, the Megyn Kellys, the Tucker Carlson let it go? Like, at what point do they give up on this?
So, it's a good question. Let's assume for a moment that Trump sticks with his guns, right? My guess is they're going to try to do something to appease, right? They're going to release something else, some additional that doesn't require them to release names. And again, names are different from a client list, right? Meaning names could be flight logs, right? It could be who hung out with Epstein. It could be, who had exchanges with Epstein, et cetera. That's names. That's the part that's tough for them because Donald Trump did have a relationship with Epstein. So I don't see how they can do that. I do think that, remember that when the FBI raided Epstein's home, there's a lot of underlying material that hasn't been released, right? They only released the material in connection with the Ghislaine Maxwell trial that was relevant specifically to that trial. Could they release more of the FBI information? Yeah, I think they might. It won't satisfy the folks who want to be convinced of a conspiracy, but at least at that point, Trump could say, that's it. We're releasing more. I've instructed them to release more, but we got to drop this. And I think if that happens, my guess is the MAGA folks will eventually drop it.
My answer to that question, no one asked, but at most this story goes to Friday, and I don't think it makes it to Wednesday because Donald Trump will do something to distract. I don't think he will release anything. He already thought the Ukraine move with NATO would. It did not, except for Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk held this event, Turning Point, over the weekend, and as I said, everyone took that stage and said, Pam Bondi's got to go, and they were outraged. And then here's Charlie Kirk today and why I don't think this lasts.
I'm done talking about Epstein for the time being. I'm going to trust my friends in the administration. I'm going to trust my friends in the government to do what needs to be done, solve it, balls in their hands. I've said plenty this last weekend. So if you guys want to see my commentary on it, that's fine.
Charlie Kirk is done. I presume in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Donald Trump will appear on his show for a live interview, and he will do the same with Megyn Kelly, and they will all shut up, and it's over by Wednesday. Am I wrong, Dan?
You might be right. You might be right that it ends sooner than.
Well, then what about what Steve Bannon said? It will cost Donald Trump 40 seats in the midterms on the opposite extreme. What do you think of that prediction?
Yeah, I mean, look, Steve Bannon is great at saying stuff that gets him an enormous amount of attention. And this would be one of them. It's not going to cost him 40 seats. I think that, look, this is a non-story. That's the reality. Is there are a lot of people who want to believe this isn't. When I say it's a non-story, I mean the secret Epstein files, the stuff that's being hidden. Do I know that for sure? No. But I have a strong feeling, again, based on what we learned in the Maxwell trial and the lawsuits, that stuff can't be forgotten, is because we learned so much during that. We also learned about what we didn't know. So, I just don't see where that pocket is of information that supposedly would blow this thing open. With that in mind, then this isn't a big story. There's nothing to release that will change anything. And as a result, I don't think it'll have any long-term impact.
Yeah, and in general, Democrats don't care about this story. So the idea that it moves the needle for the midterms is peculiar.
Well, they like it now. They like it now.
Yeah, yes, they like it now, but they're not exercised about it the way the conspiracy QAnon theorists get exercised about a child pedophile ring.
Jamie Raskin wants them to come before Congress. Bongino, Bondi, Patel.
Sure.
Any chance that'll happen? Any chance we'll ever hear anything from Ghislaine Maxwell, who, according to some reports, her lawyers are trying to get her story out there before Congress, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think she's willing to do whatever she can to get a deal, right? And anything that will somehow, by the way, today is the day that the government has to file its final cutoff for its response to her appeal in the Supreme Court for Maxwell. So today is the day the government will be responding. So look, I think that I don't think Maxwell is going to hold the secret that everyone's looking for. But I do think, look, Democrats want to extend this. Why? They like the idea of a rift in the Republican Party. That's good for Democrats. So I'm not surprised that Raskin and I think Ro Khanna, I think some others have been calling for, we got to have hearings about this. It's not because they care about the issue. They just want to stick it to Republicans.
Right. But Dan, you were alluded to the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. What else could we learn? What if she were to come forward? What didn't we learn in that trial? What's missing?
She didn't testify, right? So I mean, if she's ready to spill the beans, so to speak, and she says, there is actually a client list and there are really big names. Okay, well, suddenly this is interesting. But I think that's unlikely. But I can't look for her. She only speaks out if and when all of her appeals are exhausted, right? She can't at this point say something which can potentially harm her while she's appealing. I don't think.
Laura Loomer would like a special counsel, and she has been very loud about this from the beginning. From a legal standpoint, you're a lawyer. Shouldn't someone else be in jail? Hundreds of young girls were trafficked and or raped. Shouldn't somebody else be in jail?
Who?
You're telling me You think that's all the government knows?
I mean, again, it's like,
That's
it's nice to say.
possible.
It's nice to say, like, somebody should be behind. It's like, okay, who committed the crime? What's the crime, right? So I could understand asking that question before Ghislaine Maxwell went to prison, but Jeffrey Epstein's dead. Ghislaine Maxwell's in prison, and who else are the criminals here who haven't been charged? You can argue there have been people who should have done more or who should have alerted, and you could argue the prosecutors in the early case, how could they have given him the sweetheart deal that they did? I mean, those are all fair criticisms, but the question of like, who else should serve time? I don't know.
Also, some of the people who did know things and maybe didn't alert the authorities were also themselves victimized. Jeffrey Epstein did a good job of keeping some of the young women around, putting them on staff, paying for their college education. Like it was a very confusing kind of role that some of them had to play for him. So I agree. It's just he and Ghislaine were the masterminds. That's it.
Dan, what if Donald Trump, God forbid, slept with an underage girl? What do you think happens to the MAGA coalition, both in Congress and across the country? Because I take a lot of shit for this. I say nothing.
Well, I don't think they'd be able to prove that, first of all. I mean, like, so let's say someone comes forward and says it happened, the timing would be questioned, right? Which is, wait a sec, you're coming forward now? I mean, now meaning years after Jeffrey Epstein was in the news, right? Now it's only Donald. So it would be a tough argument to make. But, look, if you want to take a pure hypothetical, I mean, look, even if he was convicted, I mean, I don't know that it would have that much of an impact. But it becomes so theoretical that it's almost not worth engaging in.
Oh no, that doesn't stop the right wing, red meat MAGA folks from speculating,
But it's funny you say that, Allison, because I listened to Dan's program today on POTUS. If for those of you that don't listen, great show on Sirius. It seemed like the phone lines were lighting up. If I'm wrong, am I wrong, Dan? And it seemed like these weren't conspiracy theorists lighting up the phone lines.
No, I mean, look, there were a couple. There was the guy who said, are you actually sitting here telling me that there were thousands of victims and there wasn't a ring involved? That's the argument, right? Putting aside the fact that it seems there weren't thousands, but regardless, hundreds, whatever it is. The argument seems to be a sort of common sense one. That's how conspiracy theories sort of flourish, right? Is to say, well, we don't really have evidence of it, but you tell me, does this seem likely? Does it really seem likely that blank, blank, blank? It's like, I'm an evidence guy. I'm a facts guy. I'm willing to consider conspiracy theories if you can show me some, I was very concerned with all those drones in New Jersey. Why? Because people were actually seeing stuff. It was like, it wasn't conspiracies that there were drones. There was stuff happening in the skies of New Jersey. Now, in the end, was it like aliens? It seems no, but I was super interested because there was real concrete evidence and facts.
Yeah, not just binders full of pages of like redacted stuff. I mean, that was Pam Bondi's. Do you agree, Dan? That was Pam Bondi's biggest, misstep that she put out as though the MAGA media was going to like the binders full of just pages of nothing, as though that was going to work.
The problem is when you look at the timeline of what she said, it stopped making sense. And this is kind of my point before, right? Which is sort of, Jesse Waters puts her on the spot and she says, I'm going to break news for you right now. Tomorrow we're going to be, and Jesse says, flight logs and lists and client lists. And she's like, yep, we're going to have this. The next day they released like legal documents that basically everyone had already seen. And then her next position is, well, the FBI actually withheld certain documents from me. That's why it's taking a while. Okay. So now we're like a week later. Then it's a month later. And she's saying, oh, the FBI is working overtime 24/7 to redact names. I can't allow anyone to have the victims' names out there. And my point earlier already was that those names had already been largely redacted. But okay, so you're still working on it. It's still coming. It's still happening. I think in the end, there was never, if the theory is, if the reality is that there isn't a, quote, incriminating client list, and it would just be embarrassing for the various people who had any kind of friendships with Jeffrey Epstein, that Donald Trump is one of those friends. And as a result, it's not going to get released. And I think that's the part about it that, and I think that's why it may go away in MAGA world, is because people are going to realize in the end that that's what this is about.
I mean, there's not one or two. There's more than a dozen photos of Trump and Ghislaine Maxwell, Trump and Epstein at various occasions and video of them. My last question is less about this and more about you as a legal analyst, seeing the job Pam Bondi has done. Have we ever seen anything like it? And should she be out for incompetence, let alone the Epstein files?
So look, I've known Pam Bondi for a long time. I was a big fan of Pam Bondi. She was on my show many, many times back in the 2000s. She was actually on my show a year ago, again, talking about another issue. I've always liked her. Look, I think that her excessive loyalty to Donald Trump instead of to the job of Attorney General is leading this to be a very bad situation for her. I think that when you have 20 members of the DOJ and we just learned have been fired because they touched in some way, shape, or form the Jack Smith case, even though they weren't decision makers, they were support staff and whatever else, they're still getting fired. That's a problem. I think the investigation of Chris Krebs, who was the head of cybersecurity, who had the gall to simply say that the 2020 election was fair and is now being investigated, is a problem. I think the fact that, Comey and Brennan are being investigated, and again, every time I say this, I can go into details about the Comey stuff, about the Brennan investigation, et cetera. There's no there. This is a political vendetta. And when the response is, well, you see, this is what happened in the Biden administration. This is just payback for what happened back then. At least that's an honest answer, right? The honest answer is this is payback. But of course, when you dig into what happened in the Biden administration, it's a very different story than what we're seeing here. And what I mean by that is that Merrick Garland did not want to prosecute Donald Trump. He had the opportunity in 2021 when the left was yelling and screaming about how can you not prosecute for January 6th? And he didn't do it. So what led him to finally do it? The documents case. The documents. And he suddenly has to appoint a special counsel. Then the special counsel takes over and Jack Smith prosecutes on the very cases that Merrick Garland didn't want to prosecute on. So that's and by the way, I also did a deep dive on every single major Democrat and Republican who was indicted or investigated by the Biden DOJ, and there were more high-profile Democrats than Republicans. With that said, I was very critical of a lot of the the Manhattan case was a terrible case, totally politicized. And I think that Letitia James in New York was politicized. So it's not to say there is no politicization. It's just to say that the DOJ specifically and the investigations they were doing are not comparable to what you're seeing in this administration.
That's really helpful perspective. I'm so glad that you did that deep dive and shared it with us, because who has the time except you to do that?
I did. So I had the time when I used to have a full staff on a show. So
yes, that is helpful. Yeah. Dan, this is great. Dave, did you have another one?
I just had one quick one because you said Manhattan, and I know you're out of time. Just your reaction to the breaking news that Governor Cuomo will run for mayor. And I love to look at the betting markets because they've been right all along. They've got Mamdani at a 73% chance at winning on Kalshi. What's the impact of Cuomo entering the race in New York?
I wouldn't go to the bank with it yet. I think that he's saying unless he's adding a caveat, right? Unless it becomes clear. Look, Adams and Cuomo can't both run. If they run, they're guaranteeing Mamdani wins. So if they both do it, they're both going to be despised by the very people that they want support from moving forward. I've got to believe that they're going to work something out in some way where they aren't both campaigning and on the ballot. I may be wrong, that they may be so hard-headed. You know, it's interesting because you want to say, right, on the one hand, well, Cuomo seems to have a much better shot, right, at beating Mondami, so shouldn't he be the guy? The problem with that is Adams' response is pretty powerful, which is, wait a sec, I'm the sitting mayor of New York. You lost to that dude by 12 points in a Democratic primary, and you're telling me to drop out? You know, so it's like, you know, I could see kind of both sides of it, but one of them is going to have to drop out unless New York wants a socialist as its mayor, which
he's going to win, isn't he? And what's the impact in New York City? I know you love this town.
It's going to be, you know, look, from my perspective, it would be not a good thing for New York City. And I still believe that the scrutiny of Mondami is just starting. We're starting to see stories coming out about him, things he's done in the past that people didn't realize. I think that could potentially hurt him. I think you'll see much more voter turnout in a general election than you might typically see, certainly than in the primary. Although, interestingly, in New York, sometimes the general election has a lower turnout than the primary because the primary is what determines who wins. But this time, I think it'll be different. But look, I don't. If Cuomo and Adams both run, he's winning.
Dan, thanks. This is great. Thanks for all the history of all of the Epstein madness and for giving us the latest on this.
Always a pleasure, guys. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.